Hey guys, how are you doing? In this drill, we're going to estimate the size of the mattress market in Brazil. Remember, it's very important that you do this drill before you watch my answer. It's really important that you get some practice and not only watch examples. Okay, so the case question is exactly this. What is the size of the mattress market in Brazil? And come up with any scope clarification questions you have, then listen to mine, and then go on and do the rest of the drill and listen to my answer and compare it to yours. Okay? So what I would like to ask here is basically, are we trying to estimate the market of mattresses only to consumers, or are we trying to estimate them to organizations too? Because it comes to me that there might be a relevant market in selling mattresses to hotels and to hospitals. And in this case, we're going to focus only in consumers. If you want, you can do your estimation and consider hotels and hospitals too. It would be a good idea. Okay? Now, let's move on to structure. I'm going to structure my problem here. Only watch this after you've done your full estimation. So, the mattress market in Brazil in dollars per year should be the number of beds sold times the average price per bed. And the number of beds sold is the number of beds in use times the replacement rate and the growth rate of the number of beds in use. So what does this mean? The beds are only sold either to replace old beds that are there or to get new beds for people who either didn't have beds before or used to share a bed and now won't share a bed anymore. Let me just draw this so that I can give you a clear example. If you were doing this to the interviewer, you could draw it to him if you wanted. So this rectangle is the number of total beds in use. And some of those beds are going to be replaced, and thus they are going to be sold to these consumers who are discarding their beds. So those are the beds that are going to be replaced, and X percentage here is the replacement rate of old beds. But there's also growth, so people who did not have a bed before will now have a bed. Either those people didn't exist and were now born, or were babies and are now grown-ups, or they were too poor to have beds or anything like that. Okay? And so all of that painted area is the market, the beds that are going to be sold. And the gray rectangle or the white rectangle are the beds in use today. Okay? Just one more thing that you should be aware of. If you're doing an estimation and it comes to you that using the replacement rate and the growth rate would be a good idea, don't just use these terms like the interviewer is going to know them. They're something that we created. Of course, they make sense, but they won't make sense to anyone unless you explain them. So you can use those terms, you can just use different words, but do explain them thoroughly if you're using anything like this. Okay? Now moving on. The number of beds in use today are the number of people who use beds times the number of beds per person. And the number of people who use beds are the population times the penetration rate of beds. So now that we've gotten this out of the way, it's time to start choosing assumptions. If you don't know the Brazilian population, that's 200 million. You could have asked the interviewer, they would have told you. You could have researched since you don't have an interviewer in front of you while you're doing this drill. The penetration rate of beds. So I believe that very poor people won't have mattresses or won't change them at all. So I think I will use the population below poverty line in Brazil as the population who does not have mattresses. So 5% of the population is below poverty line. 95% is the penetration of beds. Now to beds per person. So of course some people are poor and will share a bed or something like that, but I'm going to disconsider those. I'm going to consider they are among the 5% that don't have beds or don't change beds. And I'm only going to think about couples and single beds and couples, so, and double beds. So I think that around 50% of the population is in stable relationships. So 50% of the population has half a bed each person, and 50% has a full bed for themselves. Of course, there are people who might have more than one bed because they have a spare bed in their house, or they have a spare house or a spare room or whatever. I'm not going to consider those people too. So I'm going to go with 0.75 beds per person. Now, replacement rate and growth rate. I'll start with the replacement rate. So this is exactly 1 over the average lifetime of the mattress. So if a mattress lasts 5 years, you are changing 20% of your mattress every year, or more specifically, 20% of the mattresses are being changed every year. And I know that I change my bed probably every 3 years. I believe I do that more often than average. So I'm going to go with an average lifetime of mattress of 4 years. So 1 divided by 4, that's 25%. And the growth rate, I'm going to go with only the population change. So that's 1%. And there's something that I want you to notice here. The drivers for the growth rate are the changes in all the assumptions in the number of beds in use. So the change in beds per person, so if the population suddenly has less couples, more single people, we're gonna be selling more beds to those people. So there would be a growth in the total beds in use. If the penetration of beds grew because people got out of poverty and bought beds, then we would have growth in the number of beds in use. And if the population grew, that same thing was going to happen. Since I'm assuming none of those two happened, beds per person and penetration of beds, those didn't change, I'm just going to assume the change in population of 1% as the growth rate. So I have a replacement rate plus growth rate of 26%. Now to price per bed. So there are two different effects that I want to consider here. One is that we have single beds and double beds are more expensive than single beds. And the other is foam and spring mattresses. So from my experience buying mattresses, I know that a foam single mattress costs around $100, and a double bed will cost around twice the price. I know that a spring mattress, double or single, will also cost around twice the price. And I've said before in beds per person that there is a 2-to-1 single to double ratio in beds. So that gives me around 130 in average price, only considering single and double. And assuming that there is a 4-to-1 foam to spring ratio, given that spring is much more expensive, so less people will be able to buy them, that gives me an extra 20% in price. So this brings me to 156 on average. I'm just going to round this up to 160 if the interviewer allows me, and in this case the interviewer allows me. So now let's go to the calculations. 200 million times 95%. I really don't want to do this right now because it's just going to complicate my life in all other calculations. So I'm going to leave this 5% behind. So I have 200 million minus 5%. So 200 million times 75% will give me 150 million minus 5%. 150 million times 26% should give me something around, well, it's going to be close to 1/4 of 150 million. So that should be around 37.5%. Plus 1%, that will bring me to 39%, 39 million. Okay, so 39 million minus 5%. I want to round this up, not exactly round this up, but change this to 40 million minus 75%. So if I take those 2.5% out of 40 million, I'll go back to 39. So I'm not really rounding, I'm just changing the way I'm doing this math. And now the last step is 40 million minus 75%, 7.5% times 160. So that will bring me to 40 million times, let's do 40 million times 150. That would be 6 billion. Now this is my ballpark. I know this is just my reality check. I'm gonna do this more precise right now. So 40 million times $100, 100 Brazilian reais, will bring me to 4 billion. 40 million times 50 will bring me to 2 billion, and 40 million times 10.4 billion. So this should be 6.4 billion. 6.4 billion minus 7.5%. So 7.5% of 7 will be 0.5, around 0.5, and of 6.4 shouldn't be much different than that, so I'm just going to use that value if the interviewer is okay with that. And so I'm going to go with 5.9 billion. So this is my final answer. And just before I really state this as my final answer, let me just make a quick check and see if this makes sense. Okay, so what I want to do here is see how much this is of the Brazilian minimum wage. So 6 billion divided by 200 million is $30. So that would be around 0.25% of the yearly minimum wage. So that sounds pretty reasonable to me. Doesn't really sound too little because there are so many other expenses that people have. So sounds quite reasonable. If in this case you didn't know the Brazilian minimum wage, you could have just said, oh, I would like to compare this to these 30 Brazilian reais to the Brazilian minimum wage and see how much that represents of it. Because if it's too much, then obviously this is wrong. If it's way too little, honestly, I don't think you'd really be able to tell. Like this 0.25% could be too little or it could be reasonable, and I'm not really sure. But that's at least one way of doing this. Now I want to show you common mistakes that could have happened here. They happen all the time when I was coaching candidates, and they happen all the time in interviews. So the first one would be saying something like, I might replace my mattresses much more often than the average consumer. So this might be overestimated by around 150% maximum. And the problem here is that there is no comparison. There's just an indication of the most sensible variable. The same thing would have been the most elaborate candidate who would have made a mistake saying the assumption most sensible to the final result and most liable to error is the replacement rate in this case. So I dig deeper into that to reach a more precise estimation. So what those two candidates are doing is not doing a reality check at all. They don't even know if this is wrong or if this number is wrong or not, but they're saying this is how I check if this number, this is how I would correct this number. They don't even know if it's wrong. And another common mistake here would be to say, I've checked all my math and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it. If you want, I can check again, but my numbers are correct, so I'm sure of my answer. And like I said in the step-by-step, this could be a candidate that actually thinks that the interviewer wants you to check their math. This could be a candidate that just wants to show confidence. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do a reality check here. Okay? You didn't really say anything. So now, before I'm done with this, of course, I want to do a follow-up question here. Let's assume that the interviewer asked you, we did some research and found out that the actual market size is 12 billion Brazilian reais. What do you think is causing this difference? So I said 6 billion, the interviewer said no, it's actually 12 billion. Where is the problem? The first thing I want to do here is get my structure. And I want to look at it and see what assumption is like the second candidate who actually made a mistake in their reality check, and find the assumption that is most liable to error and that would change the most the result. And in this case, it would be the replacement rate. So it is possible the replacement rate is higher than that. It'd be hard to think of a replacement rate of 50%. So I don't think this would explain everything. We'd have to find something in beds per person probably, and probably in price per bed too. Maybe I underestimated the price of a single foam mattress, or even one of those ratios that I did. Okay, now before I finish, I want to remind you of 3 lessons that you could have seen in this estimation, other of course than practicing all of those skills and steps that we've seen. So number 1, the driver of sale of durable goods is replacement rate and growth of usage, or growth of used goods. So the driver of sales of tires, for example, is the replacement of tires in use. The driver of sales of window frames is the replacement of the window frames in use. Same goes for cars and everything, and all durable goods. Okay, so beware of that, and beware of growth rate too, because if a specific city or country is building several new apartment buildings or something like that, then there is going to be a growth rate in the number of window frames, not only a replacement rate. Okay? Now, number 2, the growth drivers are the same drivers for the total of whatever in use. So, as I said, the growth drivers for mattresses are the changes in beds per person, population, and penetration rate of beds. And the same goes for all other durable goods. So if you have, if you want to find the growth drivers for cars, they are the same. The changes in the drivers for the number of cars in use, and same goes for all others. And number 3. This is regarding the reality check that I said in the ending, and I'm going to repeat myself, but this is really important. There must be a comparison in the reality check. Don't just check your math. Don't just say what variable could be wrong. You need to have an actual comparison of a number with another to make sense of a value and to say whether it might be too large or might not. So do all possible efforts to come up with a comparison. If you can't find a value to compare it to, at least find a figure. So you can say a number that you don't know but you would like to compare it to, like I said, but actually do try comparing something, because if you don't, you're not reality checking at all. Okay? Well, I hope this video helped you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.